8, and that's on agenda page 10, and that's the notice of motion to be moved in the name of Councillor Wayne Walker and seconded, I think, by Councillor Watson. So in your hands, I think it is with you. So I'll move forward. Yes, would you like to, we'll put the motion up, and at the outset, can you please move the motion? If you could use your mic and just say move again.
So moved.
Yeah, thank you. And Councillor Watson.
Second, thank you.
Thank you. The motion's on the floor.
Okay, so thank you very much, councillors. The notice of motion is about a very large building in Hobsonville that's referred to as the Wasp Hangar. It's called the Wasp Hangar because there was a really big aircraft called a Wasp that used to be located in the hangar, much like the Catalina hangars and other hangars out in Hobsonville. What's important right now is that the Wasp Hangar is for sale with the land under it as part of a larger 6-hectare block. And that 6-hectare block was part of an earlier Unlock Hobsonville project. And the purpose of the notice of motion, and there are two parts to it, is essentially to provide some advice to council and the local board prior to the sale about how the master plan for Hobsonville, that includes the airfield's central plan for the Wasp Hangar, is going to be implemented as it refers to the Wasp Hangar and associated public square. And I'll speak to that. Right now, we've got no idea as to how anything is actually going to happen. No idea. And then B, because there's a sale that's proposed and there's a sale and purchase agreement that will be part of that. So we're asking that the sale and purchase agreement include reference to a contractual arrangement for the retention and refurbishment of the Wasp Hangar and the provision of the associated Wasp Square as per the master plan for Hobsonville. And the master plan for Hobsonville, to be clear, that we're referring to is the 2020 master plan with the airfield's sub-precinct that went to the Panuku board. We actually haven't seen that master plan formally. We should. So I've spelled out the why. First of all, it's incredibly important that this council and the local board have some oversight, that we just not leave it to a process that might not generate any community outcomes. Desirably, it would be great if options were brought back to us. And desirably, it would be great to have the opportunity for a community recreation facility to be delivered to us as part of the sale agreement. And we have a friendly development partner. I think everybody knows that that is Kāinga Ora, who have been developing Hobsonville as a whole. And just like other venues in the area that are amenity venues, Kāinga Ora has vested those in the council. So what we've had throughout Hobsonville is a process where assets have been developed that have needed refurbishment. Kāinga Ora has done that. It's used its working capital, and then it's vested those in the council, and the council has run them, either as sports facilities or other things. So what we are not doing through this notice of motion is we're not stopping any commercial negotiations. Those negotiations are going to proceed. But what we are stating is that those negotiations should be better informed. So if I turn now to what you've got in front of you, and you've got a number of documents, there's the correspondence that Margaret Miles referred to between the local board and Panuku, where there is an assurance given that the local board will be engaged with. That hasn't happened. You've also heard from the local board that there's a commitment on their part for $500,000 to support the retention of this asset and the refurbishment. And there are also a number of supporting letters from any number of groups, of whom there are many who have stated that they want to use this asset. And I can assure you there are a colossal number of groups that would love to have this indoor facility and are prepared to pay for it. The other big document is the master plan, and this is the 2020 master plan. What I've done is I've circulated to you just 3 pages from that, and also 1 page that goes to the unitary plan. And I'll just pluck out a few quotes and just quote them very briefly. The illustrative spatial plan, you'll see that shows the wasp hangar and the wasp park, and references, quote, "The heritage of the site is celebrated through the repurposing of the wasp hangar as an Auckland Council sports and recreation facility." And then just at the base of that page, and I circle it in a highlighter, "This plan considers Airfield Central, which is the sub-precinct that includes the wasp hangar, as an integral part of the Hobsonville Point framework, master plan and vision, supporting and providing for the continued success of the suburb." There's another point, point 7, Wasp Hangar Square, open space for informal recreation, including youth activities, and so on. And then under public realm, 5.5, neighbourhood park, Wasp Hangar Square, and I'll just quote, "To the east of Wasp Hangar, an open space has been identified as a, quote, neighbourhood park that will match the area of that identified in the 2016 plan change." And then on another page, item 9, under deliver community amenity, bullet point, "The repurposing of the wasp hangar by Auckland Council sports and recreation to provide indoor sports facilities." So that is only a snapshot of 100 megabytes of documentation that goes to this general area, with 16 references to the wasp hangar and the wasp square. So it is an integral part of the development delivery of this area. The other document is just an attachment from the unitary plan, and the unitary plan specifies the retention of the wasp hangar and its repurposing. It doesn't specify for what, but it is protected as it stands under the unitary plan as a character building. And as a character building, it is referenced in numerous locations in the master plan in the Airfields precinct. So you've got that document. And I also plucked out of the master plan a number of references, so you've got those as well. And I also referenced the Finance and Performance Committee agenda item that spelt out the sale of the area, but that agenda item was informed around the retention of the wasp hangar. So consistently, yes, there's been a proposal to sell, but in every gestation of the master plan process, the wasp hangar has always been retained, and that's now locked in effectively through the unitary plan. The other thing that I'll just cover off, because there's some history, is this area's been through a number of changes. So initially it was going to be a marine precinct with the wasp hangar retained, then it was going to be a full precinct with the wasp hangar retained, now it's going to be a residential area with the wasp hangar retained. The conversion of the balance to residential, and this is high density residential, makes it even more important for the wasp hangar to be retained for recreational purposes and for the wasp square as a neighbourhood park, so that you've got community amenity. What happened last year then is COVID came along, and that particular master plan that should have been solidified by Panuku went on hold. There have been successive meetings on the part of Panuku, but the outcome of those meetings, the documentation, the supporting information is not available to us because it's all redacted and there's been no reporting to us. John and I have had to actually ask questions to find out just what's going on. So that comes back again to the purpose of this motion so that we know what's happening, how it's being delivered. There's a memo that you've got from officers, and the memo makes a number of observations. It says that there's no needs assessment or business case, but there's a whole program business case as part of Airfield Central for this development, and there have been extensive costings done by Panuku and also Sports and Recreation. As I mentioned, it's been set down to be retained as a character building. But what is really important right now, if you look at the memo, I'll be as brief as I can, is as it stands now, the undertaking on the part of Panuku is the wasp hangar is to be retained as a character building and be repurposed while considering the wider development. So that's all we're going off. We've got no idea what that development might be and how the community needs might be met. What I do mention in the background notes that I supply you is because we've got a development partner that's, I would suggest, very beneficial, that development partner actually has the working capital available to refurbish the wasp hangar, to retain it and deliver it as a community facility to us. So that does not involve any immediate extension of debt on our part. So we should have that option made available to us, hence the purpose of the notice of motion. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Now I have, before we go to other speakers, actually, Chief of Strategy, would you like to address the notice of motion from the council perspective?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Walker and Watson, for the notice of motion, and Chair Miles. That was a helpful conversation as well. I just wanted to explain, and Councillor Walker's touched on it, the reason for the memo. The reason really for the memo was just to, it wasn't to provide an opinion or a position. It was just really to outline some key facts that we felt were helpful for those of you who are not as intimately involved in this part of the region and in this particular project. So it was fact-based. That was all it was for. There was no view taken or opinion given through that. We have focused in that memo on what has been called the 14.6 master plan, which was the one that was approved through the Auckland Development Committee, so a predecessor to this, back in 2015. That is the only plan that has been approved through this committee. And Councillor Walker has mentioned the 2020 plan or others that have been developed over time, but this is the one that has been approved through this committee. You can clearly hear that there's been a lot of work being done over the years since 2015 on this in this particular area. And the reality is, as I've just mentioned in the memo, and again, this is for information and for your further discussion, there is no needs assessment that says that there are indoor courts required at this location. And of course, there has been broader work done on the Upper Harbour Local Board's Ollie in Albany for a far more substantial project. But in reality, we don't have a needs assessment. We have this site now for sale. And yes, we have a development partner, which let's just remember that has not gone through yet. So let's be careful about what we say there. But so if we talk about a development partner, that is happening. We have no capex to do the work. We have no opex to run it or to maintain it into the future. I'm just laying out facts. So, and I am concerned, you haven't asked me, but I'm going to give you my view anyway. I am concerned, you know, as a senior member of the council, of the work that is being done on this, where we have no capex and we have no opex. that does concern me, and clearly in light of an LTP conversation that you'll continue to have, and this is going to be one of many in terms of prioritisations, I can't continue to support staff doing work on this when there is no money to do anything with it at the end of the day. But look, I'll leave it there. As I said, I'm not putting an opinion. I'm just laying out facts, and I'm giving you my advice just from a prioritisation, I guess, and work perspective, and certainly happy to take questions, but we'll leave the committee to discuss that. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Megan. Now I'll go to further questions or comments. Member Tau Henare.
Kia ora. Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering who do I ask this question to? What consultation has there been in the sale process of this particular piece of land with local iwi?
Who would be, obviously that's a question to the council, not to the mover or seconder. So.
No. Ross, are you...
No,
Sorry, I don't know the answer.
We do have a representative from Panuku here, Marion. Marion, do you have information on that? You heard the question?
Yes, Chair, I can answer that. So there was consultation done with iwi back in 2015-16 with respect to the original report that came to this committee. There was further consultation undertaken through the Eke Panuku Mana Whenua Forum, just following the emergency budget process.
So when you say it, there was consultation. Who are we talking about? You just mentioned Mana Whenua Forum. Who was it at the beginning?
Who was it that undertook the consultation, or who did we consult with?
Yeah. Who was the consultation with?
The consultation was with the 19 iwi. So we went out to all iwi with respect to, as we do with most.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
We went out and consulted with all iwi.
Can I ask if I can have a look at? Is there a report that? Yeah, I just need to be sure that one, local iwi have been consulted. Two, the proper iwi have been consulted, because there are ructions going on in Tāmaki at the moment about who's got primacy and who hasn't. And I'll tell you right now, it's us. If you get my drift. And I suppose it goes to the whole process of where we start, even before we get to the local board about what they may or may not want to do with the property. So I just want to get my ducks in a row. So, yeah.
So Marion Panuku can provide that to Member Tau and the Independent Māori Statutory Board office, please. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Member Tau. Councillor Coombe, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Walker, for your work on this. Obviously, you've done a lot of deep dive into all the paperwork, and to Chair Margaret Miles as well for her advocacy. I guess I've got two questions, if I may. One, I'd like to direct to the mover of the notice of motion, and one to officers. What I'm trying to really understand is there is a master plan with the wasp hangar being a pavilion. Doesn't talk about the uses for it. We've heard from the local board saying that they would like it to be a recreational facility, and we've got in the memo saying that the hangar is going to be retained through the sale. So I'm not clear, the recommendation that you have doesn't actually take this forward as a recreational facility. So what is it that you're asking us to support that's not already happening? Because the hangar is going to be retained, and the local board are asking for support for it to be a recreational facility, and that's not what your recommendation says.
May I respond?
That's
So-
the first
Yes,
question.
the
and then-
question is to you as a mover. So
Correct. So both motions reference the master plan for Hobsonville, which I've described, and the wasp hanger. And as I mentioned in those quotes, the master plan specifically references the wasp hanger being retained for sports and recreation purposes, and it identifies specifically Auckland Council as the owner and operator of that facility. So that's in this documentation. And the local board, further to that, has indicated that it would put up $500,000 to assist with the fit out. And then there is the prospect of various clubs and the like, conceivably even a trust, being involved in running it. So the use is implicit in the references to the master plan.
Okay, well, I guess I'm reading that it says on here, it says to spatial, what's it say? So little. Set up the wasp hanger as a pavilion within the space.
Well,
That's not a recreational facility.
that is one of 16, 20, 30 references. If I draw your attention to 5.3, the heritage of the site is celebrated through the repurposing of the wasp hanger as an Auckland Council sports and recreation facility.
Okay.
And then wasp hanger square, open space for informal recreation, including youth activities.
Okay, so you're saying that if we support this, then and consistent with the master plan, even though I would say that that's quite generic, you're saying it supports a recreational facility. That's what you're asking us to support, a recreational facility.
Yes.
And then, so I guess, can I just have a clarification of Megan? So in the memo, it says that work is underway. I mean, the hangar itself is part of the sale, and there's a willingness to work with council on the future use. What exactly does that mean? And what is the outcome that's likely to happen if we continue on what we've already agreed?
So firstly, could I just clarify, the documentation Councillor Walker's provided this morning is in relation to this March 2020 plan. As I've said here, based on the original notice of motion information and also the committee resolutions that have happened, I provided advice on the 2015 or that 14/6 master plan, which did not specify uses in the way that things have developed over time. So there's a difference there from one perspective. So I provided advice around the 14/16 master plan, which was what we were talking about originally. And so yes, there has been work being done about indoor courts, a recreation facility. And as I have said, taking from a needs assessment, if that is what you look at, there is no need requirement here. But we still have staff working on a business case around that. But we are also talking with the development partner, and the development partner will retain the building. So no issue there. I guess the question I think that Councillor Walker is raising is, can we specify what the use of that building is going to be? That's one question. Linked to that, of course, is, and I guess, who pays for that? And I'm giving you advice from our end that we don't have money for it. Does that help?
Thank you, and that helps because it's not clear which master plan we're referring to, because the master plans have different uses.
That's right. That's right.
So I guess yeah. Thank you.
I'm happy for the mover and the seconder just to tidy up if there needs to be, a bit more specific
2020
around
master plan.
the description of the master plan. And I think the other thing I'm hearing is I think you're assuming, aren't you, that Auckland Council Sport and Rec actually doesn't just lease the facility but actually owns the facility? Is that what you're meaning? Because it's not clear.
The understanding that's been inherent in all of the documentation is that the council would actually retain the ownership of the building. And what is stated is that Sports and Recreation would run it. Obviously, Sports and Recreation could lease it out. There could be any number of arrangements around that.
Okay, let's,
Sorry, Mr. Chair, could I just make that clear? There has never been any decision, resolution, whatever you want to call it, to retain ownership of this building. So there is no issue with selling it. I just want to make that clear. There's nothing in there to require that.
I understand that. Through you, Mr. Chair, the difficulty that we have, and Megan is quite right, there was an earlier master plan back in 2015. That process has been superseded, one, by the Unity Plan that protects the wasp hanger as a character building, and secondly, by the identification of a neighbourhood park, so provision through the plan change 2016 for a neighbourhood park, which is proposed to go in this area.
okay. Well, look,
So the 2020 master plan, even though it hasn't come before this council, which it should have done, is still relevant. And that is the purpose of bringing this to you, so that as a governing body, we and the local board have some oversight.
I'm just being reminded that it's a little bit difficult to sort of understand the motion as it is then in those words, my view only. But councillor, with the agreement of the meeting, the meeting might be open to some changes. Apparently, for a notice of motion, there has to be, is it just majority acceptance? So look, if I need to go to other questions.
Sure.
Because I think, the meeting's given you a good 12 minutes to introduce it. I'll leave the mover and the seconder if need be. It's totally up to you if you want to suggest or ask the meeting for some changes. I'll go now to, I've heard from Councillor Dalton, haven't I? Yes? No, that was in the early part. Questions. Councillor Dalton now.
Thank you for those questions, Councillor Coombe, because I was sort of a little bit unsure of what the request was. So I think what you're actually saying is that you'd like Auckland Council to retain ownership of the building and then deliver the indoor courts or the sporting facilities. You're asking for council to retain the ownership of the building and then deliver the indoor court facilities. Is that the intention? Because for me, this is actually a post-LTP discussion, because that is all around the community investment model that's out for consultation that we agreed to. But there's also all these other processes that have taken place, which is agreeing to the sale, to the delegation to Panuku to do their work, and then to come back to a local board and have the more detailed discussions. That's normal. And sometimes that can take a couple of years, So my question was one of clarification, because the indoor court facilities, so the memo says the strengthening required at 3.9 million, and then would have to deliver whatever goes in there. The board's putting in $500,000. So they have something to use before the $25.6 million facility is delivered, which is the bigger thing. We're in some pretty tight times, but also more than that, more than the inability for council to pay for it, and I totally accept what you're saying about staff resource. Am I clear that the intention is that for councillors to retain the building? That's what that is saying. That's really what you're saying.
It's not saying that. It's saying that the WASP Square be retained.
Yeah.
It's also acknowledging the provision of the public square. I mean, the assumption is that Kāinga Ora would vest the public square in council, but we're not stating that. And it would be highly desirable for the WASP hanger to be vested in council. That would be highly desirable, but we're not stating that. We're simply saying there that the WASP hanger is retained and repurposed in line with the master plan, and the master plan should read the 2020 master plan. And yes, it's desirable for it to be a council asset, but that process is going to be a later process of some negotiation with Kāinga Ora, and desirably as a consequence of that negotiation, the sale and purchase arrangement is changed or reflects that accordingly. And it would be highly desirable if Panuku came back to us with that.
Are Panuku currently in negotiations? Because Panuku will go to the local board. Panuku won't come back to us initially, and they will go to the local board when they're ready with something. So are Panuku doing that piece of work?
Yes, and of course that's, it's a bit late now, but there is confidentiality around that, obviously, around that development partner.
Thanks, Councillor Dalton. Councillor Sayers, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Some good questions by my colleagues there. I've probably got two questions. One probably for Panuku, I think, Mr. Chair, and maybe one for the mover. Would Panuku like to comment on, or do they have concerns, perhaps is a better way of putting it? Are there any concerns that Panuku might have around those resolutions in terms of any issue, concern? And shall I put my second question that I'd like to put to the mover is, hearing the concerns around there being from the Chief of Strategy being no money around CapEx or OpEx for this, what the mover's comments, Councillor Walker's comments might be around that. Thank you.
Okay, the memo that came back from the Chief of Strategy was at my request to just clarify the council point of view, and that is the whole council point of view, including Panuku, of course. And that I'll just check with the Chief of Strategy that the memo does reflect the council family point of view. So it reflects the Panuku contribution to this work as well, Councillor Sayers. We do have Panuku here, and they can confirm it directly to you if you have any doubt.
I wouldn't mind, Mr. Chair, if you can indulge me on that. I'd appreciate that.
That's absolutely fine. Marion, do you mind just popping up again the memo that was distributed? Councillor Sayers is generally asking, does that memo reflect the Panuku contributions or Panuku's part in this overall process?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is correct. It does reflect Panuku's position.
Mr. Chair, probably with this resolution up, I don't know if Panuku had a chance to see this in advance or not. Are there any direct concerns around the A or B? If it gets passed, does Panuku have any concerns about those A and B clauses?
I think I'll come to the Chief of Strategy on that. Remember, this is a notice of motion. It's not quite like our normal business. And I'm giving a lot of leeway here to ensure that the mover and can respond to questions. But there's a point where I just need to be careful as your chair. Chief of Strategy?
Councillor Sayers, I'm happy to answer that, and this is a group response, and Marion can certainly, particularly if she needs to clarify a question that I'm just going to raise here, or a possible concern there was just around the way the lot and CT numbers were framed here. So I think that was the full 20 hectares of land as opposed to just the 6 hectares that we're talking about now. So should this go through, and so this is just there's nothing significant about it in the sense it's not wrong, but if this did go through, we would want to specify this to the 6 hectares, not the full 20, because the other 14 has already been sold. So not a criticism, we would want to just clarify that. Beyond that, if I look at A then, the master plan, we have a question, I think, about what master plan we're talking about. We have reflected the one that has been approved through this committee as opposed to the 2021 or the kind of continuing work that's been done. And that goes then to the end of that A, where it talks about the wasp hanger and the associated square and what it's used for. And you've heard my advice about needs and money in relation to a recreation facility there. So yes, we would have some concern about that, although the notice of motion is asking how it will be implemented. Well, I could tell you now, there'll be some person will buy it, they will retain the building, and we will work with them around what that whole outcome is for the whole of the Hobsonville community. So in a sense, I've kind of answered the question in one way. I'm not sure that's quite what the mover wanted. In B, again, with that specification about lot and DP numbers, there is the sale and purchase agreement at the moment, or the work going then will retain the wasp hanger. But again, the purpose and behind this is with around a specific use. And so I would have concerns about specifying the use of that, particularly again, we have questions about money. So does that answer your questions?
Megan, it does. That's a very thorough answer, and I thank you for it. And just my second question, Chair, to the mover about any comment you'd like to make, Councillor Walker, about the lack of OPEX and CAPEX.
So, two things. First off, just around your reference around the CT, more than happy make the reference to the 6 hectares, not a problem. As far as the master plan is concerned, we're talking about the 2020 master plan. That's the only one that I know of, unless there's something beyond that. And then, as far as the other question that you're raising around essentially the money, Megan's right. The council doesn't have CAPEX or OPEX. But what we have is a development partner that does have the CAPEX to do a refurbishment in the same way as they have refurbished any number of other facilities in the Hobsonville precinct and then delivered them to council. So as far as working capital is concerned, that's a form of CAPEX. We don't have to use our working capital to deliver this. The development partner can do that. So that deals with the issue of no money as far as CAPEX is concerned. And almost certainly, because the development partner will be committed to retaining the asset, it follows that they will be spending the money anyway on fixing it up. And that will also be reflected in the overall sale price for the land. That is going to happen. So effectively, we're paying for it one way or another, but we don't have to dip into any working capital to do that. As far as the OPEX is concerned, it's possible for a trust to be set up. It's possible for sporting and other groups to pay for the use of the asset. It can be used for cultural facilities. It can be used for recreation. It is a phenomenal indoor space. And the local board has also made a commitment to put some money in. And there are any number of groups that have indicated that they are happy to use and pay for the space. In the same way as we operate other facilities. So I hope I've answered your question around the CAPEX and the OPEX, Mr. Sayers, Councillor Sayers, and I've also dealt with those tidy-ups.
So in summary, the expectation is that it's external to council. Okay, Councillor Cooper, please.
That is the question, whether it's external to council or not, because when I've spoken to Koinga, or they've said to me, they're not in the business of building community facilities. So my question really is, if we don't sell this part, have we got a kind of an indication of what the loss of return that we were expecting is? Is it in the millions? Maybe just a ballpark?
Look, I think there's commercial negotiations that are
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, that's fine.
now,
So I guess this, I want to know, so whichever way you cut this, my question is, who pays? Is it the council? or is it kāinga ora at the end of the day to develop? If we keep it and then someone else develops it, who pays in the end? It is us? Is that the question? It is Auckland Council?
I'll pass that to Chief of Strategy, please, if she can possibly respond. It's a bit
all
of
very hypothetical, isn't it?
Yeah.
Look, at a very gross level, my view is that yes, we would pay.
I reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Deputy Mayor, please.
Mr Chair, there was some discussions had this morning about trying to round this out, because I understand exactly what the two councils are trying to achieve here, and it is having a good outcome for the community. I just think we're trying to be a little bit too prescriptive and directive, which could actually endanger the negotiations and hurt the actual value proposition. And so we've drawn up some 4 sort of bullet points that recognise the position and recognise also some options going forward. Under your discretion, Sir, when would you think those would be appropriate to be dropped into the discussion so that people can actually see there is a potential pathway here that could work for all concerned?
I'll probably, if you're going to move something, I need to probably stop you now, because I don't want to stop your ability to move a motion. Are you suggesting you are going to move an amendment?
It's probably more than an amendment. It's a proposition to progress this forward in a manner that's actually achievable.
Okay, I haven't seen that. So can you put the words together, and if it's an amendment by addition or replacement, can you make that clear and put it up, and I'll come back to you after I take another question? Or are you ready to go with it now?
Well, Mr Glasgow's got it, I believe.
You got it.
And it'd be by replacement, Mr Chair.
Okay, can we see it? Is there a second for your Councillor Cooper? Can we? Okay, so I've got a.
Yeah.
We're now limited to discussing the amendment. So we'll put the amendment up, and it's an amendment by, is it replacement? By replacement. Okay, so we need to just take some time to read through it, members. And then Councillor Cashmore, I'll come back to you to speak to the motion. Okay,
Point of order, Chair.
is it enough time?
Yeah,
Councillor
just
Ford,
a point of order in regards to the amendment. Bless you. Chair, in regards to the amendment, could the amendment not be put or discussed if the mover and the seconder of the original recommendation agree? I do not know what they would agree or not agree with. If that is then put into their amendment, do we have to discuss this? Okay, I just wanted to try and save us some time. Killed it.
What I hear you're saying is can we find a direction whereby the mover and seconder of the original motion might like to adopt this replacement?
And I've just been told that cannot happen because we now have to discuss the amendment, and this is why the point of order was there, Chair. So, look, I understand and thank you to both Duncan and Sandra. So we have to go through that process now. Thank you.
Okay, look, I haven't got a signal whether the mover and the seconder are amenable to the motion, but not that I've asked for it, but I'll just check with the staff. If that was the case, there's no way you could swap out the mover and second's name. It's on the table. Unfortunately, it's standing orders, but good question, thank you. Okay, now I'll go back now to the mover. We're discussing just the amendment by replacement, and back to you, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks very much, Mr Chair. And I do like to recognise Councillors Walker and Watson for what they're trying to achieve here. It's admirable. And what the Upper Harbour local board's doing, so that's why the first bullet point talks about their commitment to this process. And we heard Margaret on that this morning, so thanks, Margaret. The second one notes the unitary plan provisions that talk about, okay, here's a space that we want to actually activate for the best interest of the community. And the discussion with the potential developer can be about what that activation actually looks like and how it will come to without being overly directive. The third bullet point notes that there is no capital or funding for OPEX. So we've heard that loud and clear. So this is a way to progress that without impinging upon capital books or for other project substitution from other local board areas. And the fourth and last one is to request the staff to continue to work to achieve high-level outcomes from the 14-16 master plan within the sale and purchase process with a potential developer for the Wasp hangar and associated sites. So that sort of is the roundhouse about it. It's progressing this forward in a manner that is collaborative with the potential developer. Mr. Chair, that gives an outcome that the local board, the local councils and us as governing body desire. I think it's a way forward that gives us an opportunity that's maximised rather than being descriptive and potentially having negative impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And just following up on Councillor Filipaina's point, and he was trying to embrace people here, I'm wondering if you as mover and the Deputy and Councillor Cooper might want to, and the acknowledge the commitment of the Albany Ward councillors and the Upper Harbour local board.
Definitely. Thank you for that addition. Yeah.
Councillor Cooper. Now, I don't want to put the Albany Ward councillors in it unless they want to be in the motion, and I'm not suggesting that this is going through, it's before us. Can I just send, would the Albany Ward councillors like the addition of Albany Ward councillors and your names there? No. And Councillor Walker? Not necessary. Okay, leave it as it is. We'll proceed. So on the amendment, it's moved, seconded, and I've had an introductory speech in support from the Deputy Mayor. I'll go to Councillor Walker.
So the particular problem with this amendment is it references the 14.6 master plan, which is 2015, which is out of date. As I've mentioned, the relevant master plan that should be under consideration is the 2020 master plan that Panuku worked up and has worked up over the last few years, and the plan change in 2016 around a neighbourhood park. So specifying the outcomes of the 14/6 master plan aren't appropriate because, as I've stated, they're out of date, and that's acknowledged because that master plan was designed for a marine precinct. So,
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sayers, I have you next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I'm getting a little bit confused around what's the active master plan here. So for clarification, has the 2020 master plan, is there an adoption process? Can the 2020 master plan actually be referenced into any motions if it's not adopted? I'm trying to get the organisation's official position on which is the live master plan and which is a master plan that may be desired. If I could get some clarification on that. And along with that, is there any reason why the 2020 couldn't be associated with that question, couldn't be referenced rather than the earlier
Chief
one?
of Strategy, please.
Thanks for the question. So I've taken this advice to you around the council adopted master plan, which is the one referenced as 14.6. So that's the 14 hectares plus the 6. So that's why that is in there. The outcomes, as kind of a summary of some of the broad outcomes are in paragraph 9 of the memo that I sent through. And none of that is inconsistent with any kind of use, or certainly community use, or benefiting the wider community of the square, of the building itself, and the other surrounding precinct. Similarly, we have effectively given effect to that or enabling that through the unitary plan, as Councillor Walker said earlier. So we've embedded that part of the master plan as well into the unitary plan. There has been work that has continued, and you can go down to minutiae level, of course, about what actual use, et cetera, is needed. And that is what has been done over the last few years and certainly months. So the 2020 master plan is useful. My concern, or my advice to you, my concern, I guess, in relation to this notice of motion is still the one about giving effect to it. And if you're very detailed and you're going through a sale and purchase agreement, that is not necessarily helpful. But we do know that we have a development partner which we will work with and continue to work with to get good outcomes. But it doesn't lock us into paying for anything necessarily, and it doesn't lock staff into continuing to do work where there is no money around it. So, in my view, it will provide good outcomes. It may not be exactly as Councillor Walker and Watson want it, but it is perhaps a safer place for you and for Panuku, who is doing a lot of this work on our behalf.
Thank you. Councillor Sayers, back to you.
Thank you very much. I just understand the procedures here, just to be quite clear. If this will go up for the vote, if it gets passed, it's through. We don't go back to the original notice of motion. Is that correct?
Correct. It's a notice, it's an amendment by replacement in full. Thank you. Councillor Hills, please.
It was, thank you, Chair. It's probably just questions, and this is why notice of motions are difficult, because I'm never sure who I'm asking. But I guess my first question is, isn't this too late if we're already in a development agreement mode that's already being negotiated? This is pretty bad practice. Whether I believe in this or not, and I definitely understand the councillors and local boards' concerns, but isn't this completely at the wrong end of the process?
Sorry, through the chair. Look, the fact that we're talking about this with a development partner to retain the building is everything that everybody wants. So that I don't think that's in question at all. So there's no problem with that. I think it's the specificity of the use of it is probably the thing in question. You've heard my advice around that and the group's advice. I guess the question is how specific you get about that versus working as a council with a development partner, etc., on, as we have throughout Hobsonville, the overall use and benefit to the community there.
And my understanding is this 2020, although great, was a draft in the month that the pandemic kind of hit. So I imagine there was some great ideas of how we'd find $4 million or more dollars. But so if we were to specify or vote this down and vote up another, I sort of am wondering all the nicety behind it. We could lock in something that then we have no money in the 10-year budget for, and then a whole development partner can just disappear or be completely locked for 10 years effectively. Is that what, because I'm just confused, and this is why it's hard with notices of motion, is that our decision might sound nice in practice, but actually it won't achieve the outcome in any of our other previous processes. Is that what?
Thanks, through the chair. I think I'm sure the building will be retained. So let's bank that one. But what would happen is we'd go back to what we're doing now, which is a whole lot of work in lots of places with no money to do the work we're doing now, let alone to fund anything that we want ultimately. So, and again, this is not the only project where this is happening. This is the difficult conversations we have and you have through LTP and annual plans of what we can afford and what we should be prioritising and deferring and all of those kinds of things. So we'll kind of just be where we are now, which is we will have the building, someone will have the building. The question is, can we afford to do anything with it? And that's I guess the Deputy Mayor is trying to get a position where it's a little bit more useful than where we are right now, to be, sorry, speaking for the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. And Councillor Watson, please.
At some stage, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
the amendment. It's just the amendment at this stage.
So if you
Quick,
finish
any
with- finish
questions?
with no questions, I'll speak
comment?
when appropriate.
Okay, Councillor Watson, can I go to Councillor Henderson for questions first? And we'll conclude the questions on the motion, the amendment that is,
Yeah.
and then we'll go to comment.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Watson. Yeah, look, I'm very confused. So my question is this. I'm reading C and I'm reading D, and I'm trying to figure out how they're both consistent with each other. So obviously there's no CapEx and OpEx funding. That's clear, and C reflects that. And yet in D, we're asking staff to continue to work to achieve the high-level outcomes within the sale and purchase process of the specific building and associated sites. Have I just not had enough coffees? I don't understand how they're consistent at all. We can't ask staff to go and say, look, we should probably do this, but by the way, we've got no money. I don't get it.
Question?
I'll answer it, and then the Deputy Mayor might have a view. That's all right. So look, the work in particular is things like the business case and other things around the recreational use of the building, the specificity of the use, even seismic analysis, all of those things, and that's particularly reflected in C. I guess the Deputy Mayor could have stopped at C, but there's a recognition that because it's, well, in Hobsonville in particular, but also with the development partner, we know that staff will want to work on these outcomes anyway. So D is trying to reflect, possibly not as well as I could have advised or helped, to acknowledge that there is still work that we'll do, but we will not be putting a lot of time and particularly money into work that is not helpful for the ultimate outcome, that we will work with our development partner, but we will not continue to do work on business cases that won't go anywhere, and things like that in relation particularly to the specific use of the building. I'm happy to clarify any wording on that if that's helpful, and maybe the Deputy Mayor might want to make a comment.
Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up, I still don't know if I'm quite getting it, but maybe it's just me. Follow up. So if we're to take it as read, as per advice that we are continuing to retain the building, that will require consequential OpEx, if nothing else for depreciation, even if we let it sitting there. We have money for that?
So when I said so the building will be retained. At the moment, we're in negotiations about who will own that, but I'm just saying the building will be retained.
That is, the building will stay in situ, that sort of retained, rather than retained in a specific ownership. Councillor Cooper, did you have a question on
It's
this?
just a question which might help clarify. So C is don't keep doing work on developing the building as a sports facility, but do keep working with the development person we're working with to achieve the high level outcomes, like the square, like the stuff like, yeah, that's in that master plan. That's the difference, because people have been working for quite a long time in this with
thank you.
no end in sight.
Councillor Watson, I'm going to Councillor Watson now, please, on the...
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, this is actually very simple and straightforward. The original notice of motion. This in some ways is almost a negative because it doesn't address the two fundamental issues that the notice of motion set out to achieve, and that was one, what's happening with this WASP hammer, okay, because we don't know, and two, how is the public interest in it going to be protected for a sales and purchase agreement. This is acknowledge, note, and request staff to continue to work, high-level outcome. We want a degree of specificity. It doesn't have to be you're building a sports facility. It's not that.
This is entirely driven by protection of the public interest in this building before we sign an agreement. Now, Mr. Chair, you and I know more than anyone how we need to be a little bit more watchful on these sorts of agreements than we have been in the past. Out the window there at the moment, we have the Civic Administration building, which had a Heritage A protection, which was supposedly tied down in development agreement, is proceeding with virtually no similarity to the facade, which was the fundamental points of the protection, east and west wing, because it wasn't tied down. So we had a massive big discount on the price based on the preservation and heritage values. It's proceeded, sold for $3 million, and the fundamental part of the building bears no relation to the protection that it was meant to have. This is another version of that, and I would just mention this document here that goes to the CCO review, and particularly to do with instances like this. And this is what our notice of motion is getting at. So we passed a recommendation 42. Council gives CCOs guidance on how to balance public and commercial interest in such dealings as this. How do they balance that? And what all we're wanting to know through this is that we've had a number of years of it being spelt out very clearly what the public outcomes in this WASP hangar is. It's going to be protected and preserved. That's in the unitary plan, so that has to happen. That's not up for question. But as far as the community good or the public use of this facility goes, it's very, very vague, and I would suggest purposely vague. And we're only doing our due diligence as ward councillors to try and ensure that through this process, that one, we know what's happening to this hangar, and it doesn't have to be it's going to a sports facility in terms of the protection of that public good. How is this WASP hangar going to be utilised for the community? And that might well be, well, we don't have a specific use just at the moment, but it's envisaged that it could be one of these. We can't fund it. Okay, we know that. We're being a little bit naive to think that given the unitary plan designation of IE, require the retention and adaptive reuse of the hangar building as part of the development of the airfield substrate. In light of that, we're a little naive to think that Kāinga Ora is not going to make the appropriate adjustment for that in the sale. They are going to do that. Of course they're going to do that because they're getting landed with this building, and the community expectation, this tens of thousands of dollars of documentation and planning over the last few years points to that community use. That's the local board expectation, it's the community expectation, it's our expectation. But they will be factoring that into the sale price. Of course they will be. So yeah, sure, we haven't got the money to pay for it, but they have, and that will just be adjusted with the sale price. Of course it will be. So what we, as councillors, and which this does not address at all, does not address in the slightest, two very simple and reasonable things that we have been encouraged to do through the CCO review is to simply say, what is that community good, that community outcome that is envisaged, and that might be a range of things with provisos on them, and B, most importantly, how is that going to be protected in the sale and purchase agreement? I don't want another Civic, Mr. Chair, or some other such version where we find later down that all we had is this vague reference, and and I would suggest, without being too cynical, which I've been accused of in the past, that that's not accidental to willingness to work with council on future use of the WASP hangar. No, no, no. If we're going to a sale and purchase agreement, we want something tied down there that establishes what we know in the unitary plan, that this building is protected, that's a given, but also what the intended community good and protection is for that building. So it receives no less than the status Panuku has given in any number of these documents over the last 3 years, which basically is that this building is to be preserved and it is to be readapted for community use. Latterly, it seemed to be a sports facility. It might well be something else. I don't know. Either way, that's going to happen with Panuku.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just round it off very, very briefly. Either way, that is going to be reflected in the sales price. That's a given. That's the nature of commercial arrangements such as this. So this, and the CCO review made reference to Panuku in terms of land transactions at the time being a little opaque in their way that they represent the public interest. And in fact, were criticised for that. I had to look up what opaque meant, and it meant sort of flimsy or blurred or cloudy. And this is exactly what this does. It is cloudy. It is the appearance of doing something without any substantive and meaningful point to it. And our point through our notice of motion was quite simply to tie that down to the sale and purchase agreement. That's perfectly reasonable. If we're acting in the public interest over this heritage building, this character building that has to remain, we know that, then that should be reflected in the sale and purchase agreement in whatever form that's appropriate, given that there are uncertainties here. Acknowledge those uncertainties. That doesn't do that. That's more of the just leave it and, you know, hopefully we'll work it out type of thing. We know from bitter experience, particularly with some of the even more notable cases, that this hasn't happened. So as a mover, that doesn't do any of those things. It is entirely unsatisfactory. It's designed to basically confuse people to a certain extent and to have the appearance of progress when there actually is none. Our notice of motion, by contrast, was largely stating the obvious of what is going to happen with this building within a realm of options, and most importantly, how is that protected in the sale and purchase agreement? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got Councillor Cooper, please.
Thank you. From my point of view, the notice of motion was the motion that was really confusing, because it wasn't really clear what was trying to be made happen until it was spoken to, and it was really clear it was about building an indoor court. So that would be, and in previous documents I've seen, it was about temporary. So on principle, I'm not prepared to spend millions of dollars on a temporary building before the Albany one's built. But the other thing that I think is really, on principle, is that interfering in a process that we've charged Panuku to do right from the beginning. We've already outlined, as Councillor Watson said, there's a balance of what they need to do, and that's what they're trying to do. But not only, for me, what's really, really concerning is not just a notice of motion, but also physical visiting interference with the people that we are negotiating with. And that's not appropriate at all in the middle of a negotiation. So I hope that with this we get work on the outcomes with Panuku doing that, with the interested party, not individual elected people. And that's not the local board, because they said they hadn't met with the party. I won't mention it. It has been mentioned before, but I won't. So those are the things that in principle really concern me. We need to let our CCOs get on with their job. That is what we've tasked them to do. We have a resolution to sell this. We've already been told by the Director of Strategy that in negotiations we're looking for the interested party to keep that building. But speaking with Panuku myself about this, not with the people negotiating, is that they've said whatever way we cut this, Auckland Council will pay. Because Kāinga Ora are not in the business of building community facilities. And my understanding with the Sunderland Lounge, my understanding that there was money from council that went into that refurbishment. It wasn't done by Kāinga Ora and then given to us. So that's the other thing. The other issue is, for me, is that we're talking about with the square. If we can get that square, it'll be fantastic. But I walk this precinct at least twice a week. there are many pocket parks, and they're all surprising. You walk around and go, I'll go a different way. Oh, another little really cool pocket park. A lot of us would, I won't say the word kill because it's not appropriate now, but you'd be really grateful to have the number of pocket parks, the number of boardwalks, the number of really great recreational opportunities. And also, it's about a 10-minute drive to an indoor court at the Massey Leisure Centre. So it's not like it's a long way away, but that's under pressure too. And I really support the local board in developing their plan for the Albany indoor court, which is about a 10-minute drive from Hobsonville Point. I think that'll serve a really good, it's kind of in the middle of the Upper Harbour local board, and that's the right place for it. I absolutely support that. So for me, that's why I'm supporting this. This is a better way forward. This is the right way to do this, the principled way to do it. Have Panuku work with the developer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. We'll go to Councillor Walker.
So following on from the comments that Councillor Watson made, and certainly the comments that went to the CCO review, what we've had to date is a process that has not been transparent, and there's been inadequate engagement with both the local board and the council. So we should have seen the 2020 master plan, the business case for it, the massive amount of documents associated with that. We should also have the information around the costings that have been done by Sport and Recreation and by Panuku and the like. And we should also be informed about the work that has been done that does indicate that there is a very substantial need for indoor recreational facilities in the Auckland area at large, and especially in this area, which is one of the fastest growing, highly intensive subdivisions in New Zealand. All we have tried to do is to put up a very pragmatic notice of motion asking first that Auckland Council and the Upper Harbour Board be advised prior to the sale. Be advised prior to the sale? What's wrong with that? That's informing us. And then secondly, that the sale and purchase agreement include a reference to a contractual arrangement for the retention and refurbishment of the wasp hanger. What's wrong with that? Because it's already locked in through the unitary plan. What's wrong with that? And referencing the provision of the associated wasp square and the wasp hanger through the current master plan. And that master plan should have been adopted by us. It should have been considered by us, but it hasn't because of sloppy processes and obviously the advent of COVID and the like, but it does not mean that it is not appropriate to reference it here. The amendment here is virtually a direct negative because it references an earlier master plan that's way out of date. And we all know that. Things have moved on. In other circumstances, if we were talking about the Wynyard Quarter or any other area of Auckland, we would reference the most up-to-date material, particularly when there's been a huge amount of effort attached to it, and it references what the requirements are around neighbourhood parks and facilities. So I say to you, councillors, vote down this notice of motion, this amendment here. By all means, if you do want to approve something, you could approve A, but B is redundant because, as I've pointed out, the 14.6 master plan's out of date. C, it's referencing that there's no capital or operational funding, but I would suggest that there is capital and operational funding. It may not be available through council, but it's certainly available through a development partner in no different way to many other developments that are provided to us by developers that put in place subdivisions and the like. And again, D should be voted down because it references the 14.6 master plan, the 20 hectares of which we've sold most of it already. It's out of date. So we should be moving on. We should be considering something entirely pragmatic, which is this notice of motion that is put before you, which I would suggest would have the support of the Upper Harbour Local Board and the wider community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I think finally Councillor Coombe and then Councillor Philippa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will speak very briefly. I don't like to vote down a notice of motion without giving a reason, because I appreciate there's a lot of work that goes into it. And so I did just want to briefly, in speaking in support of the amendment, which I think is essentially just saying what is happening. I don't think it's asking us to agree anything further. It's just saying this is the lay of the land. But in terms of the notice of motion, I've listened very carefully, Councillor Walker and Councillor Watson. Appreciate what you're trying to do, but the notice of motion, the recommendations didn't achieve that. They didn't achieve what you wanted. You were asking us to revoke the decision to sell. It didn't say that. It asked you were asking us to go on a different pathway in terms of the decisions that have already been made. So I just think in terms of stepping us through it, it really needed far more clarity around where the budget was coming from, what we're all aiming to achieve, that needed to have correct references to the relevant documents. And so I guess it's just a plea that in future, I mean, I'm a great believer that if something's a good idea, we can make it happen. And so, you know, the notices of motion are when you get stuck being able to achieve something collaboratively. So I would really encourage, I'd be really willing to help work on things before they get to this point where we can spend 2 hours debating something that we've already agreed, we've got a way forward, and it kind of comes in at the last minute. So, you know, just an offer. I'm very willing to just work on trying to achieve, for all councillors to try and achieve things in their areas if it's a good idea. But I just can't support the notice of motion as it was drafted, because I don't think it was getting us to the right point or good decision-making practice. So, you know, I think it's good that we're actually going to move this. I'm willing to support this amendment just because I think it clarifies for everyone the steps that we're going through now. So thank you, Deputy Mayor, for putting that forward and with the seconder. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor Coombe. Councillor Philippina, please.
Thank you, Chair, and speaking to the amendment. Chair, what I see in front of me is very clear. It's acknowledging the commitment of the Upper Harbour Local Board. Also, obviously, from our perspective here, it acknowledges the 2 ward councillors. It also notes what the governing body, through the Regional Development Committee that we had previously, adopted the 14.6 plan. So it is embedded and it's stating that clearly. So I've got no issue with that. C, again, I've got no issue with that because we've spoken to this and some of the questions asked at the previous debate, Chair, around the budget, which is really no budget. So that's clear. In regards to D, again, it's clear for me only because it gives our staff the opportunity as we go through these confidential negotiations to put that to whoever we're talking to around the purchase of the land. That is clear to me. From my perspective, previously, Chair, we were talking about the lack of indoor facilities around Tamaki Makoto. There's been no decision at all that's been taken through to the committee that both Kathy and I have. Nothing's been brought to us around any facility. We know that there is a lack of indoor facilities, but that's something that we're working on through our work program. But nothing's been decided around this particular facility or any others. So I look forward to any discussions for us to plug the gap that's been identified. So, Chair, for me, I totally agree with Councillor Coombe, who was confused. I was confused in regards to the original. This here is clear. It gives us the opportunity. I know that Councillor Walker mentioned A on their notice of motion. I know we're not speaking about it, but I know, and Councillor Dalton actually asked that particular question, and she also said in her comments previously that the Upper Harbour Local Board, they will be advised in regards to the sale. So that's a non-issue for me. That's going to happen, and I've confirmed that with Marion. So, Chair, for me, around what I think moving forward for us, this is the better way for us to move forward. So I will be supporting the amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Filipaina. I think we've concluded that debate. So we will now put this to the vote and call for a division by Councillor Walker. So the motion before us is an amendment by replacement, and there are 4 parts to it. I won't read them out. I think you can see them, and we'll go through the vote.
Thank you, Chair. You're voting on the amendment. Councillor Darby?
4.
Councillor Casey?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore?
4.
Councillor Coombe?
Aye.
Councillor Cooper? Councillor Dalton?
4.
Councillor Filipaina?
Aye.
Member Henare? Councillor Henderson?
4.
Councillor Hills? Councillor Mulholland?
4.
Councillor Newman?
Against.
Councillor Sayers?
Against.
Councillor Stewart? Councillor Walker? Councillor Watson?
No.
Councillor Young? Carried 12 to 5.
Thank you, members. Thank you, members. That concludes that item. And I need to put it as my apology. Need to put it as the substantive, and I'll go to the vote on that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. And declare that carried. And if the members, if they have a dissenting vote that they want recorded, if they could make sure that Governance Advisor knows the names, please. Thank you very much. Now, I do want to acknowledge Councillor Walker and Councillor Watson and Chair Margaret Miles for bringing that to our attention. We have a decision on that. Now, Councillor Casey, can I just check with you? I need to organise the break time. Did you have a party that was due here at 12:30? Okay, not a party, a group, Would it work if we continued our business until 12:30 then? Or are people desperate for a break now? If we take a break now, it's only going to be about... Okay, we're going to take a 2-minute break now. 2-minute break, and we're going to carry on. That's the signal I'm getting.